Recently, I've very much been in the mood of classical antiquity and films around that. On the night of Brexit, I actually watched. I mean, this is not meant to be any sort of political statement. Just thinking of Europe, thinking of our connections with continental Europe. So just things connected with that. One of them, of course, being ancient Rome. So I was watching a scene from Gladiator. So I've been very much in a classical mood, and I decided to watch a film that I've seen several times now, which is Pompeii. No copyright infringement intended. This is a film directed by Paul W. S. Anderson, who I found out is actually from Newcastle upon Tyne. So, along with Ridley Scott, he's another director prominent to this region, and in my view, perhaps understated. This film, the reason I wanted to make this particular film review is I believe that Pompeii, it's a 2014 film, is very underrated. It didn't get the acclaim, in my opinion, it deserves. It's one of those films that you sort of wonder, well, what are the critics talking about? At least from my perspective. Of course, ultimately, it comes down to subjectivity, and yeah. So this is all just my opinion, but basically, I think Pompeii deserves more credit. So it's described as a romantic historical disaster film. I think it could also take the epithet of an epic. I think it is an epic. I've just watched Cleopatra. Cleopatra, just a word quickly about that with Elizabeth Taylor, of course, and Richard Burton and Rex Harrison, was an epic, but it was beset by production problems. And looking at it again, it's a marathon of a film, about 4 hours long. It had some impressive scenes, particularly Cleopatra's entry to Rome, or Alexandria, I can't remember now, but the set work was amazing. It was very visually impressive. But there were some parts of the film were a little bit disjointed and underwhelming. So anyway, Pompeii. Basically, this film is set around, as you would imagine, the famous eruption of Mount Vesuvius in AD 79. And of course, there's artistic licenses. Every historical film has. As they mentioned themselves in the extras, the filmmakers said, this is not a documentary, it's a film. However, I think as historical films go, the research is quite well done. And in fact, in the research, the film relies on, for its reconstruction on Pompeii on two letters from Pliny the Younger to the Roman historian Tacitus, and it opens with the quotation from Pliny. You could hear the shrieks of women, the wailing of infants, and the shouting of men. Some were calling their parents, others their children or their wives, trying to recognize them by their voices. People bewailed their own fate or that of their relatives, and there were some who prayed for death in their terror of dying. Many besought the aid of the gods, but still more imagined there were no gods left, and the universe was plunged into eternal darkness for evermore. Pompeii, of course, was, well, I should say, the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. It wasn't just Pompeii that was buried, it was Herculaneum and several other settlements. Was one of the big disasters of the ancient world. The death toll is unknown, but given the population of those settlements at the time, and given so few escaped, a figure of 13,000 has been quoted. So this was a major disaster. Um, I can see some analogies between this film and Titanic. Whilst I'm not making a comparison, Titanic is by far the superior film. I think Titanic's the greatest film ever made, but I think that there are some analogies, and I'll draw on that in a minute. I want to talk a bit though about the synopsis. I tried reading out the Wikipedia article in the previous video, but I just made a mess of that. So I'll just try giving the broad synopsis here. So basically, this starts off with the Romans on the edge of the Roman world at the area of northern England that is today marked by the World Heritage Site, Hadrian's Wall, and it shows Celtic horse people. In history, they probably would have been Brigantes because that was the British tribe that was operating in this area in battle with the Romans. And the main villain of this film, so to speak, played by Kiefer Sutherland, is a particularly sadistic Senator Quintus Atticus Corvus, who personally kills our hero's family. So Kit Harington is this young brigante, this young Briton, who is then brought into slavery, and it shows him 17 years later in a rain-drenched Londinium battling it out in a smaller amphitheatre. The provincial cities such as Londinium did have their own amphitheatres, which were a lot smaller than the Colosseum, but we know that gladiatorial games did take place in Londinium, so that is historically accurate. And of course, he impresses with his athletic prowess. I've always wondered if Kit Harington, who plays the role, if his six pack was CGI'd or if he'd just been spent a lot of time in the gym, because he really does look impressive physically. You know, he looks like a bodybuilder or a professional boxer, heavyweight boxer at that. So basically, he impresses the slave owner Gracchus, played by Joe Pingu, and he decides to bring them to Rome. Milo's character is simply known as the Celt by the Romans, or Milo is the character. He's known as the Celt. I should say he's brought to Pompeii with his fellow slaves. On the road, they see a horse that's fallen and is injured while carrying Cassia, by the Australian actress Emily Browning, returning after a year in Rome and her servant Ariadne. And the horse is injured, and Milo puts it out of its suffering by killing it, and she is taken in by him. And this Romeo Juliet scenario, without wanting to use a cliche, developed two star-crossed lovers. One is a British slave, one is a Roman lady. So, you know, different class structure, different, totally different demographic. You know, in reality, of course, they would never have had any communication, um, other than that in the context of Roman and barbarian. Um, so in Pompeii, the city governor Severus, played by Jared Harris, who is Cassia's father, and his wife Aurelia, are hoping to get investment from Emperor Titus in plans to build Pompeii. Despite Cassia's warning of Rome becoming more corrupt, she, of course, had spent time there. So, in order to make this arrangement, this character, Corvus, comes to Pompeii to do business with Severus. Severus, from the outset, doesn't trust Corvus. He sees him as quite a morally corrupt man, and certainly doesn't like his designs on his daughter. But as his superior, as Corvus is his superior, has to tread carefully. At one point, he even says to Corvus, "She would bore you within a week," and sort of showing his misogyny. Corvus is like, "Come on, man, I don't want to talk to her." Um, you know, with Corvus proposing that he take her hand in marriage to seal the deal, so to speak. In Pompeii, Milo is obviously enslaved as a gladiator, and he develops a rivalry with Atticus, played by Adewale Akinwumi Agbaje. Now, I've practiced pronouncing that, so I hope I've got it right. A champion gladiator who, by Roman law, will be given his freedom after he earns one more victory. He's playing an African in this. He's played by the British actor Adewale Akinwumi Agbaje, but he's playing an African in the film. Um, and it's revealed that Cassia has left Rome to escape Corvus's advances. So you have these sort of different dynamics developing in the background between the Romans and then also the gladiators. So these guys are rivals. I like a bit when Milo says, "My name is my own, and tomorrow we have to kill each other." So he sort of resists any attempt at friendship initially. Um, so in the amphitheatre of Pompeii, to punish Milo, Corvus orders him killed in the first battle, and the sadistic trainer Belletor, played by Curry Graham, convinces Gracchus to sacrifice Atticus as well. Gracchus, of course, is his inferior gladiator trainer. The two men and other gladiators are chained together, and this is supposed to be a reenactment of the defeat over the Britons. And at this point, Atticus starts to realize that the Romans have betrayed him and they're not going to give him freedom after all. He's just a commodity, and he was naive to believe them. Um, And during this event, with Cassia on the box as well, and she resists Corvus's advances, as does her family. But Corvus then blackmails them. He says there won't be investment in Pompeii, and he basically blackmails them. Um, Cassia, obviously taken in by Milo, and I should say her and her servant um, Ariadne Lucas or Jessica Lucas, playing the character Ariadne, are taken in by the gladiators. I mean, they one thing about ancient Romans, male gladiators were actually sort of prostitutes for Roman women. They were sexualized, they were objectified in a sense, in frescoes, and that can be seen throughout the ancient world. But anyway, during the event, Cassia defies Corvus by holding a thumbs up for the gladiators to live. And during this, Mount Vesuvius erupts. Corvus has his officer Proculus, Sasha Rhodes, fight Milo one on one. The battle's interrupted during this earthquake caused by the eruption. Of course, they believe this is the wrath of the gods. Milo and Proculus crash down into the dungeons. Proculus escapes, but Bellator is killed by the gladiators who he had so abused. Um, think of him a bit like the character of Oliver Reed in Gladiator. He's somewhat similar character. Um, and basically, the second half of the film is very much about the disaster itself. Spectacular cinematography with this. There's a lot of intrigues happen during that, and I'm not going to name them all one by one, but suffice to say, this is where I would draw Titanic analogies. You have a historic event that really did happen. You have star-crossed lovers in Milo and Cassia, and I should say there's one bit earlier in the film where they ride out on horseback together, and Milo is brought back and punished because he's worried that she will be punished on his behalf. So he tells her like they cannot be together, but she sticks her neck out to save him. Nevertheless, he is whipped, and you sort of see these two develop a real bond throughout the film. And what I like about it is it's really believable. I think there is real chemistry between the actors, between Kit Harington and Emily Browning, and I think that really makes it. For me, this is one of the. I don't think it's hyperbole to say this is one of the great epic romances of film that I have seen. Um, so anyway, towards the end of the film, there's a lot going on. Cassia's parents die, and they're portrayed as people who have integrity, who are against corruption, and this corrupt Senator Corvus kills Cassia's father. Her mother dies in the rubble. Um, and also, there is an epic scene with Atticus in a one-on-one fight with Proculus. Proculus begs for mercy. Well, actually, there's a great monologue there where he says, "A Roman does not show mercy to a barbarian." And then Atticus turns it around, even though he's mortally wounded. Let's see if a barbarian um, can stand up to a gladiator. Those aren't the exact lines, but it's a great monologue anyway. Um, and basically, the film closes with Corvus chained up by Cassia. There's a whole range of scenes that I haven't even mentioned. For example, the the pursuit of the harbour, which is then engulfed by a tsunami. I mean, this was a city that faced a volcanic eruption, an earthquake, and a tsunami, all within a 24-hour period. And the film really encapsulates that. The last sort of 5 minutes of the film show Milo and Cassia escaping the city. Um, the horse is then upstarted and they fall off, and Milo begs Cassia to ride on without him because the horse can't take the weight of them both. Says they'll be together and she doesn't want to die running, and they embrace. And the pyroclastic flow and ash from it rather engulfs them, and then it shows them as eternally set into time as covered in ash with the famous. This is of course based on the famous bodies that found at Herculaneum and Pompeii. Okay, apologies for my less than stellar description of the film there. I'm not great at reading out plots. But I want to just emphasize and underscore what this is about because for such a famous event, it's surprisingly not been done on film that much. There was the Carry On skit of it up Pompeii back in the 60s, but hasn't really been featured in that many films. So this may be the first, and I stand corrected if this is not wrong, but this may be the first, if this is not accurate, this may be the first epic film about the Pompeii disaster. Now, I'm not quite sure why the film didn't get that much acclaim. It only got average feedback from critics. Um, it's done reasonably well at the box office, but certainly not outstanding. Its budget was 80 to 100 million. It made 117.8 million, so it only just scraped by its budget. Um, and Rotten Tomatoes gives it 28%, which I think is ridiculous. Um, This is what it says, indicating rather generally unfavorable reviews. Audiences polled by the market research firm CinemaScore gave an average grade of B on an A plus to F scale. Well, I guess that's all right. Some critics were rather favorable, as shown by Vulture.com's review, which summarized the film as not a particularly original story, but it gallops along at a nice clip with the good guys appropriately gallant and breathless and the bad guys appropriately smug and snarly. Um, I suppose, and by the way, it had strong competition from the Lego movie, which to me is insane that a film about Lego could beat an epic or rival an epic. But anyway, I suppose if I'm being totally honest, it was at points somewhat formulaic. Some would say it basically blatantly took certain scenes from Gladiator and Spartacus. You could see where there was inspiration there, if not, I wouldn't go so far as to say plagiarism, but definitely scenes inspired by scenes in both those films. Nevertheless, I think there is some originality to it as well. It's a German, Canadian, American joint production, and I guess British as well, given that it's a British director. Um, Here's what I would say about the film. I think there were strong performances, particularly from Kit Harington and Emily Browning. I think there were strong leads, and there were believable leads. I mean, unfortunately, even Kit Harington said the film was more of a disaster than the event it's portraying, which is unfortunate because I thought he was very good. Um, I mean, the thing you get from this is if you had just two actors who were just going through the sort of role of, with these two, you really believe it. And it's I'm almost tempted to say it's the Jack and Rose of the ancient world because they're star-crossed lovers, and I don't mind admitting I really enjoyed this film. If enjoy is the right word for a disaster film, it's and that last scene, it's beautiful. I mean, one of the strongest things about any film, I think, is a good score, and that's another thing. This film had a good original score. It wasn't just your stock disaster movie music. This was original music, and it worked. Very sad yet beautiful at the same time. You really got the impression these are two who loved each other deeply to the point of preparing to die for one another, and it really had that. Okay, you can say it's formulaic, but it was well done in the formulaic sense. Um, the film may not be original in terms of the sword and sandal type epic, but it is original in the sense of Pompeii hasn't really been done before, at least not in this way. I also thought there were strong supporting roles, particularly Atticus and Cassia's parents. Kiefer Sutherland was a good villain, but I think even his henchman, Proculus, for example, played by Sasha Rhodes, who's an actor I'm not that familiar with, but he was good at the role, real bastard, basically. And that's what you want in the villains. Um, I think that Atticus in particular, for example, there's a bit after he is mortally wounded, he kind of faces head on the the ash cloud rushing in, and he says, "I die a free man." And there's a lot of poetic moments in the film. There's a lot of standout moments. I just think it's a real pity this film didn't get more credit. Um, Perhaps the first half of the film is a bit formulaic and a bit, well, it's been done before. But I thought the special effects were superb, I mean, okay, there is a lot of utilizing of CGI, but there were also scenes where, I mean, the fighting scenes were superb, and that was all, that wasn't fake. That was these guys trained up. If you look at the extras in the film, they did do research on the set designs. Of course, there's some artistic license. For example, it shows Cassia and her mother perhaps a little bit more involved in politics than Roman women would have been. They were very much second-class citizens. And it showed her mother, for example, conferring with her father on an almost equal basis. That's perhaps a bit of artistic license. But I think at the same time, whilst I'm a big one for historical authenticity, I also appreciate that directors need to work with what pitches to an audience. Now, I would say just check it out. I think the special effects, particularly on the big screen, were very impressive. I really got the same sense as the sinking of the Titanic in that sequence of the film, where you have this combination of everyone's on the same boat. The good guys, the bad guys, they're all on the same boat. The villains, the slaves, the Romans, everyone, regardless of social class, they're all equal when it comes to Mother Nature, and that's kind of um, quite a poignant thing about this film. I've never been to the site itself, and it's definitely something I need to do. I've been to Rome for a few days, but I've never been to the site of Pompeii. It's definitely something that I want to see. There's been some criticism from seismologists and others that the particular way the eruption occurred is slightly different in film from reality. Nevertheless, the Melbourne Museum done a superb sort of reconstruction style audiovisual. And the only difference that I could see was it took place over a longer time, i.e., about 24 hours, as opposed to the few hours that would appear to should be shown in the film. Nevertheless, the real event absolutely would have been dramatic. So there's slight differences. I don't think that that's a major issue. I mean, you could say the same about Titanic. There's some debate over the exact way the ship sank. But in the end of the day, film is about being cinematically impressive. And there's no doubt about it. The terror that people would have felt, particularly going on Pliny the Younger's testimony, um, I think is absolutely non-negotiable. And that's something the film really encapsulates. I mean, I was very impressed by the way they done that. And if nothing else, the film should have got some sort of awards for cinematography or special effects or something. It didn't get a single nod at the Academy Awards, not one. And I think that is really unfortunate. Um, 2014 had a lot of big films, so I'm not saying it was the best film of the year, but I personally really enjoyed this film, and I find those last 5 minutes very, I don't mind admitting it moved me. It did. The characters of Milo and Cassia, I hope this is the sort of film that will go down 10, 20, 30 years from now as reassessed and people think, actually, this was a film that deserved more credit than it got. Am I saying it's on par with Gladiator? Maybe not, but it's definitely a film that deserves more credit. So check it out, Pompeii 2014, directed by Paul W. S. Anderson.